Hey everyone, my name is Ben Baby. I cover the Cincinnati Bengals for ESPN's NFL Nation, and we're officially at the back half of the NFL schedule. And Cincinnati coming off that bye week, now looking on the outside of that playoff picture. Remind you, this was a team that was maybe a drive away from winning the Super Bowl last year. Now they're 5-4. They've had a very up and down season so far, and they're looking to get back to the playoffs. The defending AFC North champions, defending AFC champions. Are they going to be able to push Baltimore for that top spot and defend their division title? Or are they going to have to contend with the likes of Miami, New England, Buffalo, all these other teams that could be in the mix for a wild card berth? That's what we're going to watch as the season progresses. And if the Bengals want to get back to the postseason, there are 5 guys that they have to bank on in order to make the playoffs. And let's start with number 1. I think anybody can guess who it is, and that's number 9, Joe Burrow, a.k.a. Joey Franchise, a.k.a. whatever nickname you have for him, because I feel like there's a million at this point. Last year when we looked at him, you got to remember where he was in 2021. He had the knee injury that he suffered as a rookie, came back, didn't miss any games in 2021. However, we saw a big difference in his game in the second half of the year. When you looked at it, his numbers were off the charts. I pulled up a few of them. He was number 1 in completion percentage over expectation at a whopping 7%, according to NFL Next Gen Stats, from week 11 to week 18. I mean, you go find most of the numbers. He was up there. He was 6th in total QBR, according to ESPN Stats and Information, led the league in the fewest number of off-target throws. And it wasn't always maybe the sexiest way to go about playing the game if you're a quarterback. It wasn't a lot of flash. Sometimes he went out there and did what he needed to do, and it was a gritty performance. As much as I hate that phrase, I don't know if there's another better one to describe it. And there were other weeks where he just went out and balled out like he did against Baltimore and against Kansas City. And for the Bengals, they might need a mix of both of that, just like they got last year. And if you've hit that like button, if you've hit that subscribe button, which I hope you have at this point, we've been putting out a lot of good content throughout the year, so I don't want you to miss that. You know where we're at with Joe Burrow, where he's been at, coming back from that emergency appendectomy that he had at the start of training camp or just right before training camp. And so as he's continued to get into the swing of things, we've seen him develop and really look comfortable as the weeks have progressed. And right now, we've got him at 7th in total QBR, according to ESPN Stats and Info. The total QBR, it's a little less than what he was at this point last year. The completion percentage over expectation, which is one of my favorite stats, that's a little lower than it was as well. But I think the Bengals know what they're going to get out of Burrow. You feel like whenever he gets the team gets healthy and the Bengals are able to get the rhythm that they had going into that bye week where they won 3 of 4, you feel like this offense, could take off, which we have talked about in some of those other videos. And one of the key guys in that offense is going to be Jamar Chase, that star wide receiver who hasn't played the last couple of games with that hip injury. I was in the locker room earlier this week. We saw Jamar come in on crutches. Now, the interesting thing is, and we haven't really said a whole lot about this, but Jamar, he was using the crutches, but I feel like the other day was the first time where we saw him get off them for an extended period of time. He was able to move around a little bit. And as we talked about, a couple of weeks ago with Jamar, he was not on injured reserve in that the Bengals felt like there was a chance he could be back before the mandated 4-week minimum that he would have to miss if he was on IR. That is an optimistic view, which is a good sign for those who have Jamar Chase in fantasy. If you're a Bengals fan, hoping that Jamar Chase can be the playmaker Cincinnati needs him to be. Because if you remember, he had a really good week against the New Orleans Saints when it looked like he might have injured that hip. He had a great week the next week against the Falcons, which ended up being his last game. And he was 6th in the league at one point this year in receiving yards. So this is a guy, we're talking about the former offensive rookie of the year from a year ago. He's a guy who obviously can make a ton of plays, that combination of speed and strength. And as he gets more into the playbook as well, I've talked to him about this at length, as he understands where he's at in his progressions, where if he's the first read, second read, third read, that gives him more time to set up some of those routes and makes him an even more dynamic wide receiver. And we saw what his buddy Justin Jefferson, his former LSU teammate, what he's been able to do in Minnesota. He's a massive reason why they're 8-1. And Kirk Cousins is always rocking the ice after games. And we saw that catch he had against Buffalo. Jamar is that kind of playmaker as well. And he's a key piece for this offense, as we've seen. And I found one thing that is interesting is that, when we looked at maybe why they didn't play all that well against the Cleveland Browns, we talked to Bengals running back Joe Mixon, and he said that, they were maybe still trying to figure out what that offensive identity was going to be without Jamar. And they figured it out against Carolina. Mixon had a massive day. But when he comes back, Joe said, I think it's going to get even crazier. So that's definitely something to look out for over these next few weeks. But, when we talk about Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase in that pass game, you got to have time to throw the ball. And that's why these next two guys, I'm kind of cheating a little bit, but these next two guys are going to be key for the Bengals. And that's left tackle Jonah Williams and right tackle Lyle Collins. Now, we talked about the pass protection earlier, and it's been a topic of conversation, especially if you watched the playoffs last year and you saw Joe Burrow get sacked again and again and again. You're wondering, hey, can they protect this guy? Well, they went out. They signed 4 guys in free agency, and Williams is the lone holdover on that starting offensive line from a year ago. And they picked up his 5th-year rookie option because he was a former first-round pick. They paired him alongside Lyle Collins, a guy who was in Dallas previously. I equate it to like a high-end 4-star recruit in college football, right, getting close to signing day. He's uncommitted, comes on the official visit, goes to Jeff Ruby's steakhouse. He signs a deal. Bengals fans are really excited, and they're wanting to see those tackles play well. Well, so far, they haven't really been as good as probably a lot of people would have hoped. They're near the bottom in the NFL, to be quite honest, in pass block win rate, which is our metric at ESPN combined with some of the analytics from NFL Next Gen. Out of 66 guys, we've got Lyle Collins at 55 and Jonah Williams at 58. And Collins, if you take, that last 3-4 game stretch right before the bye, Collins is a little better and Williams is actually a lot worse. Now, the thing we probably want to keep in mind with Jonah Williams is that he dislocated his kneecap, and I believe it was week 5 against the Baltimore Ravens in primetime, was able to play well. Actually, he came back and played pretty solid. It's funny, offensive line coach Frank Pollock said that he if he knew that Williams was going to play that well on a bad knee, maybe he'll just go out, and take a swing at it and see how it goes. And while it did look good after that 1 week, we have to wonder, how much that's maybe affecting him. I think that's something to monitor in the week leading up or in the days leading up to this weekend's game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. But, the Bengals definitely need to do a good job of protecting Burrow, especially with how much he drops back. When you talk about the receivers they have, you want him to have that time in the pocket. And more importantly, just feel good in the pocket. You want him to feel comfortable and at ease. So when he sits back there, he's planting, he feels like he knows he's going to have a good pocket to deliver the ball he wants. On the other side of that coin, my number 4 guy in this mix is Trey Hendrickson. And he's a guy that flies under the radar a lot. He's very understated, doesn't talk maybe as some of the other guys in the locker room. But if you watch the tape, if you watch that Bengals defense, it's impossible to miss what Trey Hendrickson does. He's right now ranked 3rd in the NFL in pass rush win rate, which is, again, one of our stats. And that's huge. I mean, we're talking about guys in the top of the league. Micah Parsons is number 1, if that gives you an idea of who's really good in that category. Bradley Chubb right under him at number 4. And what's fascinating about Trey is that he maybe isn't creating the sacks he had last year. I believe he only has actually 4 sacks on the season, but he is winning his battles on the edge. He is creating a lot of pressure. You're seeing him get more holding calls. Zach Taylor's talked about lobbing the refs to say, hey, that guy is getting held a little bit. Can we get him a little help and maybe free him up? And you see that he is showing signs of being way above the pass rusher the Bengals thought they were getting. Because you go back and look in free agency in 2021, Hendrickson signed a pretty modest deal, if we're being honest, at $60 million, around $15 to $16 million guaranteed. We talked about Bradley Chubb earlier. Bradley Chubb was traded to the Dolphins because they feel like they're in that championship window right now. You look at what they've done. They've been aggressive. You've got Tua out there slinging it for new head coach Mike McDaniel. Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill have been one of the best receivers tandems in the NFL. That offense been really explosive. And we're seeing why there's a lot of hype about that Miami team. And they, what did they do before the trade deadline? They went out and they got a pass rusher in Bradley Chubb. Well, Chubb, when they got him in, they gave him a new deal, $110 million total, $33 million guaranteed. That's almost double what Hendrickson's getting. And right now we've got the metrics that say Hendrickson is right there with Chubb in terms of his winning his pass rushes and even a little better. And he's a guy that if he can create that pressure off the edge, help the Bengals, be disruptive and hurry opposing quarterbacks, that's going to help them out a lot, especially when you look at their top corner, Chidobe Awuzie, out for the year with a torn ACL. And that'll definitely ease some things on that secondary that's right now got starting cornerback Cam Taylor-Britt, who's a rookie, and Eli Apple, a guy on a one-year deal, a veteran, who could see, he'll be on the hot seat, might be boiling even as he continues to look at his future in Cincinnati. And the last guy that we're going to talk about is none other than Zach Taylor, the Bengals, I believe, fourth-year head coach. And when you look at what he's done last season, he was able to do what a lot of coaches can, if we're being honest. And yes, I know there's been a lot of conversation about whether he's a good play caller, whether he's doing enough in maximizing all the resources he has on offense. But, you look at it, the Bengals are near the top of the league in touchdowns per drive, points per drive. And going back to last year again, he was able to survive the hot seat when it looked like, his job security is going to come into question. And I'll be honest, a lot of coaches can't do that. They can't handle the pressure all that well. And I think Zach deserves a lot of credit. And this year, as the team's been kind of up and down a little bit, Taylor has been the one kind of preaching consistency. And we've seen that, come to fruition in the fact that the Bengals went 0-2. They were able to kind of steady themselves a little bit, had that hiccup against Cleveland, but then we saw what happened against Carolina. There was no hangover effect on a short week after getting embarrassed by your rivals up north on Monday Night Football against a Cleveland team that, quite frankly, has had Zach Taylor's number and the Bengals' number here with how many times they've beaten them in consecutive fashion. And I think that's what you want to see from a team. That's how you've got the right culture in place. And I think as we saw last season, there were some up and downs before the Bengals ultimately won the AFC North and clinched that first playoff berth since 2015. At one point, our analytics had them at less than 40% chance of making the playoffs. Then what did they do? They went out and they won the division. This year, we've got them up at around 63%. So they're in a good place. But the thing with this year's Bengals that aren't last year's Bengals is that there's a lot of expectation about what this team should be able to do. They're no one's ever sleeping on them. They're not flying under the radar. This is a team they're the defending AFC champs. And you've got teams like Kansas City and Buffalo, that are now looking a lot better than Cincinnati. And they've got to prove that they're not a fluke, that they are the real deal, which is something we talked about in the summer. So if the Bengals want to go back to the postseason, want to experience those highs, want to get back to playing for a Super Bowl again, you're going to need all of these guys that we talked about to play well. And if that happens, we may be talking about another deep postseason run.